Hello everybody, welcome back to From Rhythm to Algorithm. No real introduction, picking back up with our derivation, what is sensorality? Sensorality is tangibility, it's tangible. You can touch mass, can you touch energy? Tangible, fungible. We haven't heard about our non-fungible tokens, right? There's our weird, awkward, negative definition. Fungibility, non-fungible, not touchable. But that's why the basis of fungibility is fun. Interesting dichotomistic pair. But we have not heard about the fungible tokens lately, but fungibility is tangibility. What is the boundary of a basis? Last couple episodes, we really got at the physical intuition of what really separates one system from another. Is a bond, sharing of electrons, a stable state of this dynamic equilibrium of movement. We've established the mass gaps, which are painfully obvious. Sensorality, because again, if there wasn't a gap in mass, it would be like if you were running around with a bunch of strings tied to you, and everyone would get tied together. But what is the boundary of a basis? Again, just trying to hit at what is base versus basis, and clearly basis is two syllables, base is one syllable, and then we have this fundamental stability of two. So basis is the range of base. But again, it's just figuring out which context each of these words are used. Again, it's not like light and force don't have application. They're just reduced past completeness. And so you have to define things in complete generality. And so like force still has utility, light still has utility, but they're not the fundamental ontological forms of those words, or the correct words to represent the fundamental physical process. What is the relationship of a boundary and a limit? Right? Boundary you kind of think of physically, and then limit, but a boundary is more comprehensive than a limit, but limitation derives from boundary. And those are clearly your physical boundaries. And you have boundaries because there's gaps in mass. Sensorality limits speciality. What is the opposite of a specialty? Right? You have if you're special, if you're specialized, you're not generalized. Specialty, generalty. And so now again we've condensed that. Right? It's clear. You know what generality is, and you know what general is. Generalty, a specific general. Right? And very clear that's in the Army or the Navy or the Armed Forces. So you have generals, but generalty is the opposite of specialty. Sensorality bonds. A bond is a connection. Sensorality connects speciality and generality. Speciality, generality. Or specialty, generality. Sensorality is generality. A sensor is a general. And so that's kind of, logically you're probably saying, how is a sensor a general? But in generality, I guess, sensors differentiate things. And so that's kind of like, outside of what would strike you as intuitively clear, but they're related. And not only related, but they are. A sensor is a general. And so you can, again, and if you spelled sensor, S-E-N-S-E-R, you can see how the base is the exact same. So again, exactly when does these vowels flip? Right, from the letter E, speaking about the English alphabet, the letter E to the letter I, representing the sound E, or the letter Y representing the sound E. What is really going on there? When do you flip it? When does it iterate? Because the sounds don't change, just how we represent those with letters do. Sensorality venerates, right? Generate, general, venerate, veneral, venereal. I'm sure all you guys know about that. But venerate, vulnerable. To venerate is to honor. Again, just building out our definitions. What is banter? What is dialogue? What is conversation? Right? What context are we differentiating? Right? If you said we're in banter, you're probably thinking of something more like flirtatious or somebody of your own age group or respect level, I guess. But banter's kind of more of like a fun back and forth. Right? A dialogue is, what kind of connotation does that bring? It's more of a, if I said we have to have a conversation, you think maybe we're gonna have a intervention or something serious maybe. But you can say to have a conversation that's not serious whatsoever. So what exactly, again, is the difference of these different words? Not specifically just to banter, dialogue, conversation, but how do we scale specificity and generality with different words that clearly are based on the same intuition, same physical process, but have different application? Right, what is conversation? What is a verse? Right, if you have a bar or a verse in a song, how does that relate to conversation? Right, so what is a verse? What defines a verse? What meter? What tempo? And I remember the finality of speciality, axiomatizing speciality, was defined into music ontology, because clearly music is really fundamental. If I say, do you have rhythm? You know I'm asking if you can dance. And so that's kind of like the final context in which you define these words is musicality, I guess. But we'll get there again, not trying to guess the final solution. We're just iterating the logic until it's painfully obvious. And because all truth is inevitable, whether I'm alive to do it or not, it's painfully obvious in hindsight. You don't sit here and you just state things that are obviously true, and then the intuition builds. So what is a verse? What is the role of authority in diction? Again, what do we conversation, dialogue, banter, back and forth, command, question? How does that all relate to authority? Clearly, we have differentiation of formal and informal of who you're talking to. That really stems from a sense of authority, which typically comes from military-type things. But what is the relationship of authority and diction? Both what you say and how you say it. Sensorality reverses speciality. Speciality generates sorality. Sorality, specialty. Soralty, specialty. Soralty is generalty. General, central. Sensorality is generality. Centrality, speciality. Sensorality centerates. Centerate, vibrate. Centerate, reverberate. Sensorality is reverberationality. And so one of those chunks of derivation, again, I skip over most of them. Like to me, that was poignant enough to put it in the lecture book, so to speak, as opposed to the actual derivation book. When to me, there's no difference. They're all equally as important. But it's just showing you how I'm bridging these different base words. Even if I don't stop to explain it, you can hear the consistency. And so sensorality is reverberationality. Reverberation echoes. Remember my first song when I said we hear echoes in our voices? Again, remember all of the songs that I've written have logic in them. All of the lectures, all of the emails, all of it. And I'm circling all of it. There's just so much that I have to make these intuitive jumps. Even if you watch me all day, you can't remotely get all of it down. But sensorality reverberates, speciality reverberates. Now again, we're trying to define sensorality and speciality with words we already know, and then showing that reduction through these other words, because remember, we're integrating this. This is a concept we already talk about, and I'm just building out the linguistics, the words, then the letters we use to represent these ideas. We're already aware of what being sore means. We already clearly understand why I'm saying you spell sensorality with an S as opposed to a C when you're talking about your washing machine. All right? Those are the big final things, but we already have the intuition. We're just finalizing the linguistics, the letters. And so again, we have to show how these, again, remember, sensorality and speciality aren't really words, or at least not word forms you typically use. And so they're carrying, and languages aren't well defined, they're carrying the logic syllable by syllable. And so we're going to integrate it by defining sensorality and speciality as two words that have already been axiomatized, meaning they're just well defined. They've been used enough that they have clear meanings. And then those words will have clear difference. That will give us our finalizing difference for sensorality with SC and speciality, are three words we need to define a new axiom. Persistence is consistent. Why no consistence, right? Persistent, persistence. Consistent, consistence. Right? We don't say that, we say consistency, right? So these word forms of word families that we already would use, they're well defined, and we don't use these forms. Again, anything with an even amount of syllability is like an intermediary step or something. They all reduce or condense or go away, something like that. Which is actually, that's what the biggest thing is, like literally all of these word forms that I'm showing you all exist. They're just like even syllables, so they like cancel out. That's probably one of the most poignant reductions of all of this. And we do proofs, new proofs literally every single day. So again, you can't say what you don't know, and the words you don't know have some sort of internal symmetry that causes them to reduce. is hugely profound. That's why you've never heard of sensorality, or you've barely ever heard of speciality. Some context I've heard people like extend to that, but they don't pronounce it correctly. But all of these other ones like sorality and insorality and sensoritality, or sensoritality, they're all forms of words. They just reduce. But what is consistency, right? Is something made of the same exact thing? Is an atom consistent? If it's made of protons and neutrons and electrons, well, then you break it down to charge distribution. Is it positive, is it negative, right? Because that's the stability of two. There's no really neutral, right? And so it's like, I don't know. What is consistency? How does tension relate to consistency? That strikes me as a very physical context. Tension, if I have a block of iron, if I have my muscle, my quadricep, if I tense that, is tension more or less, what am I asking? Is it more or less strong if it's the same material, the same tissue, the same muscle? I don't know. What is the relationship of tension and consistency? Sensorality is the tendency of consistency. Again, now expanding out our logical definition for our axiom. And remember, speciality in its complete axiomatized form is the tendency to differentiate for sexual antagonism. So we have our key operative words, which is proliferation currently, which probably will be. I mean, that's for speciality. Then sensorality is some form of generality. But when I have the tendency of, again, there's the tension. That's why we just go through tension again. But tendency was the defining noun thing for speciality. So now we're getting into the right form of solution, resolution. Again, I don't know exactly how to formalize all of these final steps, but I make it poignantly clear when I don't. But consistent, resistant. Sensorality is resistant to speciality, right? In other words, maturity exists, right? You grow up, you learn how to behave better. So I'm always, again, renormalizing, so to speak, giving you a direct logical statement that everyone would agree with. Maturity increases as you age, or at least it should. But consistent, resistant, what is the relationship of flow and friction? Obviously, inversely, you flow less if you have more friction. What is the relationship of flow and consistency? Again, the same thing with consistency, flow, consistency. What was the other one we just did? Tension, right? Tension and flow. Typically, if there's more tension, there's less flow. But how do either of those relate to consistency? Is there any inherent property of our laminar flows? Do you have to have the same material? I would assume flow is proportional to consistency, but I don't know. Definitively, again, in total completeness. What is the relationship of completeness and consistency? Sensorality condenses into speciality. Condensationality, sensationality. Sorality has density. Sensorality is mass per unit area, per volume is density. So sorality has density. It's a physical relationship, proof QED. Direct linguistics to direct empirical world. How does density relate to condensation? Condensation is moisture, right? So, right, condensate, condensation, clearly the base is density, dense. So tensity, dense, tense. How does density relate to condensation? And so now see how we have we're using natural definitions, like backwards kind of, or not backwards, but condensation is directly a form of density, so it's a natural definition. Say hi to the dog in the background. Hopefully we can finish up this episode. But if I don't have a studio, the dog's barking matters more than educating you people. But condensation is moisture. Sorality has density was a big one. A couple final differentiations. Speciality is ethnicity, right? If you're a species, right? Speciality speciates species. Speciality is ethnicity. Sensorality is ethnicality. And you might be saying, wait, well, I say ethnicity is well defined. Ethnicality is, what is that, right? It's a different form of ethnicity. So now we're defining sensorality and speciality connecting them to logical things that you can't say no, and making a clear difference of words you already know. So it'd be easy for me to say what is or isn't sensorality, even though it's just a collection of syllables. But if you have words that you clearly know, I can literally latch on to your intuition, and I know that. And that's what happens when you interact with me in person. I can feel where your logic is and where the total logic is at. And so we've related speciality and sensorality, because again, remember, we're building up to a single theorem, right? So they have to contain each other. We're making enough difference so that they're unique, but then we're making a unique sequence, a unique logical statement containing speciality and sensorality. So now we've defined that with this word ethnic, ethnicality, ethnicity. Different pronunciations, ethnicity, we get that kind of sound in there. Ethnicality, that that more harsh sound, that Mjorkish knock. I don't even know if that, I think that's the hard sound one. With the little B with the little line to that way. But ethnicality, empiricality, ethnicity, empiricity, right? So that it's in there. And we don't get those, like I said, those forms of word are very, very infrequent. We don't use them very much at all. So that's how you know you're getting to the end, to this opening, right? Remember that our definitions are open. It's going to be completely generally defined, but it's going to be open so other things can build on what sensorality is. And so, again, really all of this entire thing is like reduction of the proof is truly just, no one has ever seen this level of proofing. But you see this in, like, there was a hit song from Kodak Black called ZZ, just ZZ. It got like 1 billion plus views. And this was very popular probably around, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And this is these 2-syllable names, Kiki or CC, right? So empiricity, CICI, is CC. In the same way you would have a nickname for a girl. And so that's just kind of interesting, but it is true, and that's how, again, language builds indiscriminate of context. So all of these relationships apply to literally everything that articulates language. How does speciality relate to censorship? Right? What species do we censor? If I go turn on the National Geographic channel, I can watch a baboon walk around all naked. But if I go down the street downtown and I watch John from accounting walk around naked, we're not too happy. So why is that? Right? What is this about? What defines a species? What defines us as human beings? Earthlings. It expands more than what differentiates life. What's speciality versus generality? What connects us all? What makes us all different? That's kind of where you get all of your big philosophical kind of questions. But here in math class, we stick to logical proof. It's just you've never seen logical proof extend this far into ontology. But we censor ourselves in all contexts, but we censor ourselves much more than other species. If there's enough difference, we have a different set of expectations for them, right? We can see, right, if you're watching a lion chase down a gazelle, which one are you rooting for? Well, if you want the lion to get the gazelle to have a meal, you're rooting for the gazelle's death. If you're rooting for the gazelle, you're rooting for the lion not to eat. And so Science Club that has access to everything I've ever done, you can go back to Miss Odie's class when I wrote about war, and I'm sure you can find that. And that was handwritten, so I don't know if you have that electronically. But if you can dig around, I'm sure you can find that. So again, what you guys have to realize is I'm just iterating logic, because I've done this entire process before I went to preschool. And so I have all of this intuition from literally like early childhood. It's not like me being nostalgic. I can't reference it because you guys destroyed my educational career. And so there's entire chunks of these proof that aren't anywhere besides my own personal intuition. But it's as legitimate as everything I've written down and sent to you. So good job on fucking up the progress of all of science. And each day that goes by, why can't you just pay me some money? But we have now differentiated sensorality and speciality with this base ethnicity, ethnicality. We clearly censor ourselves more than we censor other species. What is that exact difference? What is the boundary of a system? Right? What differentiates humans from non-humans? What is a human? What is that prefix? Human? Where is that prefix coming from? But speciality diversifies. Speciation is diversification. Verse, diverse. And this is interesting because, like I said, when I give you these lectures and people transmit this logic, and then I get on CNBC and Sarah Eisen says diversification in proper ontology, I can more theorems immediately pour out. So again, when I get these hits, I can tell you guys have transmitted my information. Just give me some money, man. so I can have a fucking studio and a nice thing in nature, so I can go on nice walks and do my nature stuff like I like. My goodness. But verse, diverse, diversification, verification. Sensorality verifies. Verify, testify. And so that little chunk of diversification, right? Proliferation diversifies. But that term diversification, if you were to allow me to integrate into society, interact with other people, all of these words, they just, like I said, language is condensing and becoming more efficient as a whole, not just me. I just have the tool set to analyze all of this stuff immediately. But that is it for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.